Imagine leaving town for work, trusting your boyfriend to hold down the fort, only to discover he'd secretly moved his ex into your shared apartment. Betrayal doesn't even begin to cover it, but trust me, the payback was worth every second. You won't believe how this story ends. It all began with what should have been a simple 2-week work trip. My boss had asked me to oversee a major project in another city, and though I hated leaving Jake, my boyfriend of over a year, I didn't have much of a choice. We'd been living together for 6 months, and while things weren't always perfect, I thought we were in a good place. Jake wasn't exactly thrilled about me leaving, but he didn't make a big deal out of it either. "It'll give me some time to catch up on stuff," he said with a shrug. His tone was distant, almost detached, but I chalked it up to stress. He'd been working long hours recently, and I figured we'd reconnect once I got back. "Text me when you get there," he said as I rolled my suitcase to the door. "Of course," I replied, leaning in for a quick kiss. "Love you." "Love you too," he mumbled. As the door closed behind me, I had no idea I'd just left my apartment and my relationship in Jake's hands. What he had planned while I was gone would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about him. The first few days of my trip were uneventful. The project was demanding, and I spent most of my time in meetings or poring over reports. Jake and I exchanged a few texts here and there, but his replies were short and uninterested. "How's everything going at home?" I asked one evening. "Good," he replied. No elaboration. No follow-up question. I brushed it off, convincing myself he was just busy. Jake had always been a bit reserved, and I didn't want to read too much into his lack of enthusiasm. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't until the end of the first week that I got the call from Marissa, our neighbor across the hall. Marissa and I weren't close, but we exchanged pleasantries whenever we passed each other in the hallway. "Hey," she began, her tone hesitant. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you should know I've seen someone going in and out of your apartment the past few days." "It's not you." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Well, it's a woman," she said carefully. "She's been there a lot, and I saw her carrying in some bags yesterday. I just thought it seemed unusual." My mind raced. A woman? Carrying bags into my apartment? It didn't make sense. "Are you sure it wasn't a friend or someone visiting Jake?" I asked, hoping there was a reasonable explanation. "I'm positive," Marissa replied. "I'm sorry if I've upset you. I just thought you should know." I thanked her for letting me know and hung up, my heart pounding. Who was this woman, and why was she at my apartment? I tried calling Jake, but it went straight to voicemail. That night, I barely slept, my mind consumed with worst-case scenarios. The next morning, I texted Jake casually, pretending everything was fine. "Hey, how's it going? Everything okay at home?" He replied hours later with a simple, "Yeah, all good." I wanted to confront him right then and there, but without more information, I didn't know what to say. Instead, I called Marissa back and asked her to keep an eye on the apartment. If someone was staying there, I needed proof before I accused Jake of anything. What she told me a few days later changed everything. Marissa called me again, this time sounding more confident.
"She's still there," she said.
"I saw her come out to grab the mail this morning. She's really comfortable, if you know what I mean. Did you get a good look at her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," Marissa replied. "She's tall, blonde, kind of familiar looking. I think I've seen her around before." A chill ran down my spine. Jake's ex, Lauren, was tall, blonde, and familiar to everyone who had ever seen her parading around his Instagram feedback when they were together. It couldn't be her. Jake had assured me months ago that he'd cut ties with Lauren completely. "Are you sure?" I pressed. "I'm sure," Marissa said firmly. "She's there a lot. I even saw her leave with Jake last night. They were carrying groceries." Hearing that sent me into a spiral. Lauren wasn't just visiting. She was living in my apartment while I was gone. And Jake? He was letting it happen. I had a week left on my work trip, but suddenly, none of that mattered. My relationship was unraveling before my eyes, and I wasn't even there to stop it. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. By the time I returned, the betrayal would be even worse than I imagined, and my plan for payback would be one they'd never forget. The first few days of my trip were fairly typical. Work was busy, with back-to-back meetings and late nights, so I didn't have much time to dwell on anything outside of the project. Jake and I texted occasionally, though his responses were short and lacked his usual enthusiasm. "Hope you're doing okay," I texted after one particularly long day. "Yeah, all good," he replied. I brushed it off at first. Jake wasn't the most talkative person over text, and I figured he was just enjoying some downtime at home. But by the third day, I started to notice a pattern. He wasn't reaching out at all. If I didn't text him first, I wouldn't hear from him. One night, I tried calling him. It wasn't anything urgent. I just wanted to hear his voice and catch up. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. Seconds later, he sent me a text. Sorry, busy. Talk later. Busy? Doing what? Jake didn't have much of a social life outside of our shared friends, and he hadn't mentioned making any plans. I stared at the text, debating whether to push for more details, but I decided to let it go. Maybe he was just unwinding with a movie or playing video games. Still, something felt off. Jake had never been overly affectionate, but he usually made an effort when we were apart. The silence from his end made me uneasy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was deliberately avoiding me. By the end of the first week, my unease had grown into a constant hum in the back of my mind. I found myself checking my phone more often, waiting for a message that rarely came. Even when I tried to share little moments from my trip, a funny sign, a beautiful view, a picture of my hotel room, his responses were lackluster. Look at this ridiculous pillow, I texted one evening, attaching a photo of an oddly shaped hotel pillow that looked like a pretzel. No response. The next day, I tried again. I found the cutest coffee shop. You'd love it here. This time, he replied several hours later with a single thumbs-up emoji. It stung more than I cared to admit. Jake had always been the kind of person who struggled to show emotion, but this felt different. It was as if he didn't care at all. I confided in my coworker, Mia, over lunch one day. I don't know if I'm overreacting, I said, stirring my soup absent-mindedly. But Jake's been weird. Distant. Mia frowned. How distant are we talking? He barely texts me, and when he does, it's like pulling teeth to get more than one word out of him. He even sent me to voicemail the other night. I explained, my frustration bubbling to the surface. Mia said thoughtfully. Have you talked to him about it? Not yet, I admitted. I don't want to seem clingy or paranoid. Maybe I'm just overthinking things. Maybe, she said, though her tone was skeptical. But trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Her words stuck with me. I'd always prided myself on having good instincts, but now I wasn't so sure. Was Jake just preoccupied with work? Or was there something else, something he wasn't telling me? That night, I decided to test the waters. Hey, I texted, keeping it simple. How was your day? It took him over an hour to respond.
Fine.
You? I stare at the screen, my irritation mounting. This wasn't just about his lack of effort. It was the way he seemed completely uninterested in what I had to say. It was good, I replied, forcing myself to sound upbeat. I had the best pasta at this Italian place near the hotel. I'll have to take you there someday. This time, he didn't reply at all. By the end of the week, I was questioning everything. Was Jake pulling away? Had I done something to upset him? Or was I letting my imagination run wild? He's probably just enjoying the alone time, I told myself as I lay in bed that night, scrolling through old photos of us on my phone. In most of them, Jake looked happy, relaxed, even. But now, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd missed something. The uneasy feeling lingered as I drifted off to sleep, my phone still clutched in my hand. What I didn't know was that back home, Jake wasn't just distant. He was distracted. And the reason for his distraction was about to turn my world upside down. By the time I hit the halfway mark of my trip, I was already on edge. Jake's silence had become deafening, and every unanswered text or curt reply only added to my growing sense of unease. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. That's why, when my phone buzzed one evening with a call from Marissa, our across-the-hall neighbor, I picked up immediately. Marissa wasn't exactly a close friend, more like the overly curious neighbor who always knew everyone's business. Normally, her nosiness annoyed me, but in that moment, I welcomed it. Hey, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I don't mean to intrude, but is everything okay between you and Jake? My heart skipped a beat. Yeah, why? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, Marissa said slowly, I've been seeing someone coming in and out of your apartment a lot. It's a woman. She's been there for a few days now. I froze, my mind racing. A woman? In my apartment? The words didn't compute. Are you sure? I managed to ask, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Positive, Marissa replied firmly. At first, I thought she was just a friend, but it seems like more than that. She's been there almost every day, and I saw her carrying in some bags yesterday. I thought you should know. My stomach twisted into knots. Who was she? A friend Jake hadn't mentioned? A family member? Or was it something worse? Did you get a good look at her? I asked, my voice trembling. She's blonde, tall, kind of fashionable, Marissa said. Honestly, I think I've seen her around before, but I can't remember where. I suddenly felt like the walls were closing in. There was only one blonde who fit that description, Lauren, Jake's ex. The same Lauren who had caused issues between us months ago when she'd accidentally texted him late at night. The same Lauren he'd sworn he was done with. Thanks for letting me know, I said, my voice hollow. No problem, Marissa replied. I didn't want to assume anything, but it seemed off. Let me know if you need anything. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at my phone in disbelief. Could it really be Lauren? And if it was, why was Jake letting her into our apartment while I was gone? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Marissa was mistaken. Maybe this woman wasn't Lauren at all. Or maybe Jake had some perfectly reasonable explanation for what was happening. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, a sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I called Jake, needing to hear his voice and gauge his reaction. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. I tried again, and this time he answered. Hey, he said casually, as if nothing was wrong. Hey, I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. How's everything going? Good, he said a little too quickly. Why? No reason, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Just checking in. Anything new? Not really, he said, his voice flat. Just the usual. His response made my stomach churn. If Marissa was right, and I had no reason to doubt her, then Jake was lying to me.
But why?
And how long had this been going on? I didn't press him further. Instead, I ended the call as quickly as possible, afraid my voice would betray the storm of emotions brewing inside me. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop replaying Marissa's words in my head. A woman.
Blonde.
In my apartment. Carrying bags. It wasn't just about the potential betrayal, it was the sheer audacity of it. If Jake really was letting Lauren stay in our apartment, he wasn't just crossing a line. He was obliterating every ounce of trust we'd built. I knew I couldn't confront him without more proof. If I accused him and he denied it, where would that leave me? I needed to know for sure what was happening before I could make my next move. The next day, I called Marissa back. Hey, I said, trying to sound calm. Would you mind keeping an eye on the apartment for me? If you see anything unusual, let me know. Of course, she said eagerly. I'll keep you updated. Part of me felt guilty for involving her, but I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't rely on Jake to tell me the truth, and I wasn't about to sit in the dark while someone else invaded my space. Hours later, Marissa sent me a text. She's there again. Just went inside with Jake. They were laughing about something. I stared at the message, a lump forming in my throat. The image of Jake laughing with another woman, Lauren, in the home we shared was enough to send my mind into overdrive. For the rest of my trip, I barely slept. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the apartment. Who was this woman? Was it really Lauren? And if it was, how long had this been going on? One thing was certain, when I got home, I was going to get answers. Whether Jake liked it or not. The rest of my trip passed in a haze of anxiety and restless nights. I couldn't focus on anything but the nagging feeling that something was seriously wrong. I knew I couldn't confront Jake over the phone, not without proof. If I accused him and he denied it, I'd only end up looking paranoid. So, I leaned on Marissa. She became my eyes and ears, keeping tabs on the apartment while I was stuck hundreds of miles away. At first, I felt guilty for asking her to get involved, but that guilt quickly evaporated when her updates started rolling in. The first text came a few days after our call. She's there again. They just came back with groceries. They looked pretty cozy, laughing and talking like they're on a date. My heart sank as I read her words. Groceries? Jake and I used to do that together every weekend. It wasn't just a chore, it was a ritual, one of the small ways we built a life together. The thought of him doing that with someone else in our home made my stomach turn. The next day, Marissa upped the ante. She sent me a photo, taken through the peephole of her front door. It showed the woman lounging on my couch, her legs casually tucked under her. At first, I thought the image alone was bad enough, but then I noticed what she was wearing. It was one of my hoodies. I clenched my phone so hard I thought I might break it. The sight of her, sitting comfortably in my space, wearing my clothes, was like a slap in the face. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was invasive. She wasn't just visiting. She was making herself at home. And then it hit me. This wasn't just any woman. The blonde hair, the smug expression, it all clicked. It was Lauren. Lauren, Jake's ex. The woman who had caused so many fights between us just a few months ago. Back then, she'd sent him a string of late-night texts, accidentally confessing that she missed him and wanted him back. Jake had brushed it off as harmless, saying she was just going through something. When I pressed him on why she still had his number, he'd insisted it was an oversight, something he'd fix immediately.
She means nothing to me, he said.
I promise, there's no contact. You don't have to worry about her. But now here she was, not just contacting him but living in my apartment, acting as if it was hers. Jake hadn't just lied to me. He'd gone behind my back in the most blatant, humiliating way possible. I called Marissa that evening, needing to hear every detail she could give me. So, it's Lauren? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Definitely, Marissa said. She was talking pretty loudly on her phone earlier. I heard her say something about how nice it is to be back here. Back here's? I repeated, my voice rising. What does that even mean? Honestly, it sounds like she thinks she belongs there, Marissa said. She's super comfortable. It's not like she's just dropping by, she's staying. I felt a mix of rage and humiliation bubbling inside me. Jake hadn't just betrayed me. He'd invited his ex to take over the life we'd built together, right under my nose. Thanks, Marissa, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I owe you big time. You don't owe me anything, she said firmly. You deserve better than this, and if I can help, I will. Over the next few days, Marissa's updates painted a clearer picture of what was happening. Lauren wasn't just visiting, she was living in the apartment full-time. She and Jake were practically playing house, going grocery shopping, watching movies, and even ordering takeout from our favorite restaurant. Each update made my blood boil more than the last. I tried to stay focused on my work, but it was impossible. My mind was consumed with thoughts of what was waiting for me at home. I debated confronting Jake, but I held back. I wanted him to think everything was normal, so he wouldn't see what was coming. Then Marissa sent me the final blow. A photo of Lauren's suitcase sitting by the door. She's moved in, Marissa wrote. I saw her carrying more bags than earlier. I'm so sorry, but I thought you should know.
That was the moment I snapped.
Lauren wasn't just encroaching on my space. She was taking over. And Jake? He was letting her. I spent the rest of my trip planning my next move. If they thought they could humiliate me and get away with it, they were sorely mistaken. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to take back what was mine and make sure they both regretted ever underestimating me. The truth was out, and now it was my turn to act. By the time my trip ended, I was running on pure rage and determination. I'd spent the past week piecing together Marissa's updates and watching my carefully built life unravel from hundreds of miles away. Jake hadn't mentioned Lauren, hadn't hinted at anything unusual, and acted as though everything was perfectly fine. That was his first mistake. On my last night out of town, I sent Jake a text that oozed casual cheerfulness. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I wanted him to think I was still blissfully unaware that I'd walk into the apartment completely oblivious to the bombshell waiting for me. If he suspected I knew, he might have tried to cover his tracks. I needed to catch him red-handed. The plane ride home felt like it took forever. My anger simmered under the surface, held in check only by my desire to stay calm long enough to execute my plan. When the taxi dropped me off at our apartment building, I stood outside for a moment, gripping my suitcase and mentally preparing myself. I didn't know exactly what I'd find behind that door, but I was ready for a fight. The first thing that hit me when I walked inside was the smell, stale takeout, and something overly sweet, like cheap perfume. It was nothing like the home I'd left behind 2 weeks ago. Then I noticed the mess. The coffee table was littered with empty soda cans, takeout containers, and a half-eaten bag of chips. A blanket I didn't recognize was draped across the couch, and unfamiliar clothes were piled on the armrest. By the door sat a pair of bright pink sneakers. Definitely not mine. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. This is fine, I told myself. Let him dig his own grave. Jake, I called out, my voice echoing through the apartment. A moment later, he walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. When he saw me, his expression morphed from surprise to panic in a matter of seconds. You're home early, he said, his voice tight. Surprise, I said flatly, my eyes scanning the room for Lauren. She wasn't in sight, but her presence was impossible to miss. Jake fidgeted, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I thought your flight wasn't until later, he said, his tone as casual as he could muster. I caught an earlier one, I replied, setting my suitcase down by the door. Figured I'd get home sooner rather than later. You don't seem happy to see me? No, I am, he said quickly, his forced smile not reaching his eyes. I just wasn't expecting you yet. I walked past him into the living room, picking up a stray sweatshirt that definitely wasn't his or mine. So, I said, holding it up, want to explain whose this is? Jake's face flushed, but he recovered quickly. Oh, that's Marissa's, he lied. She left it here the other day, when she came over to borrow some stuff. Really? I said, raising an eyebrow. Because Marissa's not a size small, and she's definitely not a fan of pink rhinestones. Jake stammered, it must have been someone else's. Maybe it got mixed up in the laundry or something. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. He avoided my gaze, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Just as I was about to press him further, a noise came from the bedroom, a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My blood turned to ice. Jake, I said slowly, who's in the bedroom? His face went pale. No one, he said too quickly. I didn't wait for an explanation. I dropped the sweatshirt and marched toward the bedroom door, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake scrambled to get in front of me, but I pushed past him and flung the door open. And there she was. Lauren. She was standing by the bed, her hair damp from a recent shower and her face frozen in shock. She was wearing my bathrobe, the one Jake had bought me for Christmas. Oh, she said awkwardly, clutching the robe tighter around herself. Hi. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her. My mind raced with 100 different thoughts, but the one that kept rising to the surface was, how dare she? I turned to Jake, who was lingering in the doorway, looking like he might pass out. You've got 2 seconds to explain this, I said, my voice eerily calm. It's not what it looks like, he blurted out. Really? I said, my anger finally bubbling to the surface. Because it looks like you moved your ex into our apartment while I was gone. Care to tell me how I'm wrong? Jake opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Lauren, meanwhile, had the audacity to roll her eyes. Oh, come on, she said. You're overreacting. Jake said you'd be fine with me staying here for a little while. My jaw dropped. Fine with it, I repeated, my voice rising. Are you out of your mind? Lauren shrugged, as if my anger was a minor inconvenience. I didn't have anywhere else to go, she said. Jake was just helping me out. I turned back to Jake, my hands trembling with rage. Helping her out? I said, my voice breaking. By letting her live here? By letting her wear my clothes and sleep in my bed? It's not like that, Jake stammered. She needed a place to stay. It was only supposed to be temporary. Get out, I said, my voice low and cold. What? He said, blinking in confusion. I said, get out, I repeated, pointing to the door. Both of you. Now. Jake tried to protest, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a slap in the face, and I wasn't about to let either of them stay a second longer. Lauren huffed, grabbing her things and muttering under her breath. Jake hesitated, looking like he wanted to plead his case, but one look at my face told him it was a lost cause. As they walked out the door, I took a deep breath and let the anger settle into determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If they thought they could walk all over me and get away with it, they had another thing coming. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding as I tried to process the sight of Lauren standing in my bedroom. Our bedroom. She looked just as shocked as I felt, her face turning an unflattering shade of red when our eyes met. Oh, she said awkwardly, tightening the belt on my bathrobe. I didn't know you'd be back today. The sheer audacity of her casual tone made my blood boil. It was as if she thought she belonged here, as if I were the one intruding on her space. Clearly, I said, my voice icy. I turned to Jake, who lingered in the hallway like a deer caught in headlights. Care to explain why your ex is living in my apartment? Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stammered for a moment, looking between me and Lauren, as if hoping one of us would save him. Finally, he managed to choke out, it's not what it looks like. Oh, really? I shot back, crossing my arms. Because it looks like you moved your ex into our apartment while I was gone. Tell me, Jake, what part of that am I getting wrong? Jake ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. She just needed a place to stay, he said weakly. It was only supposed to be for a few days. A few days? I repeated, my voice rising. She's wearing my clothes, Jake. This isn't just a place to stay. She's acting like she owns the place. Lauren, clearly offended, decided to jump in. Okay, first of all, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I didn't realize this would be such a big deal. Jake said you wouldn't mind. I turned on her, my hands trembling with rage. I wouldn't mind. I spat. You're wearing my clothes, sleeping in my bed, and making yourself at home in the apartment I pay for. You're damn right I mind. Lauren tried to protest, but I wasn't about to let her talk her way out of this. You don't get to talk, I snapped, glaring at her. Pack your things and get out. Excuse me, she said, crossing her arms. You heard me, I said, my voice cold and steady. You're not staying here another minute. Get out. Lauren looked at Jake, expecting him to defend her. Are you seriously going to let her talk to me like that? She demanded. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. I think we should all just calm down. Don't, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't you dare try to play mediator. This is your mess, Jake. You let her move in behind my back, and now you're going to deal with the consequences. Lauren huffed and stormed back into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I turned to Jake, my hands clenched into fists. What the hell were you thinking? I demanded. I was just trying to help her, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't have anywhere else to go. So, you thought the best solution was to let her move in with us? Without even telling me? I asked, incredulous. Jake sighed, running a hand over his face. I didn't think it would be a big deal. I figured you wouldn't even notice since you were gone. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. You figured I wouldn't notice? I repeated, my voice shaking. Jake, this isn't some minor inconvenience. You betrayed me. You let the one person who's caused problems in our relationship invade my home, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me. Jake didn't respond. He just stood there, looking at the floor like a scolded child. Is this why you've been so distant? I asked, my anger giving way to heartbreak. Because you've been sneaking around with her this whole time? No, he said quickly, finally meeting my gaze. It's not like that, I swear. Then what is it like? I pressed. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for weeks. Before Jake could answer, Lauren reemerged, dragging a suitcase behind her. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I'll leave. Clearly, I'm not welcome here. Clearly, I said, glaring at her. She paused in the doorway, turning back to Jake. You really need to think about what you're doing, she said. You deserve better than this. I let out a bitter laugh. The only person who needs to think about their choices is you, I said. Now get out. Lauren shot me a dirty look before slamming the door behind her. Jake and I stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice barely audible. Sorry isn't good enough, I said, my voice trembling. You didn't just lie to me, Jake. You disrespected me, our relationship, and everything we built together. I don't even know if I can look at you the same way anymore. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. I need some time to think, I said, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. Don't bother calling me. As I walked out of the apartment, my heart ached with a mix of anger and sadness. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. I deserved better than this. And Jake? He was about to learn just how strong I could be. When I walked out of the apartment that night, I wasn't just angry. I was humiliated. The image of Lauren lounging in my bathrobe and Jake's pathetic attempts to justify his actions replayed in my head over and over. I crashed at my friend Emma's place, pacing her living room until the early hours of the morning while venting my frustration. I can't believe him, I said for the 5th time, flopping onto her couch. How could he think I'd be okay with this? Letting his ex move in behind my back. The audacity is unreal. Emma handed me a glass of wine, her expression sympathetic. You don't owe him anything, she said firmly. Dump his sorry ass and move on. He's not worth your time. I know, I said, staring at the glass in my hands. But it's not enough. It's not just about ending things. It's about making sure he understands exactly what he's done. Emma raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I can't just walk away and let him and Lauren get off scot-free. They disrespected me in my own home. They treated me like a fool. I need to do something that'll make them think twice before they ever pull a stunt like this again. Over the next few days, I weighed my options. I could kick Jake out of the apartment. After all, the lease was in my name. Or I could confront Lauren one last time and really let her have it. But neither of those ideas felt satisfying enough. Then, while scrolling through my phone one night, inspiration struck. I came across a photo of Jake and me from happier times, taken in front of the apartment door. And just like that, the perfect plan started to take shape in my mind. "You're not seriously going to do this," Emma said when I explained my idea to her the next day. "Oh, I am," I replied, grinning for the first time in days. "It's bold, petty, and perfectly justified. If they want to play games, I'll show them I'm the master." The first step was simple. I called my landlord. Since the lease was in my name, I had full control over the apartment. I explained the situation in vague terms, emphasizing that I needed to change the locks immediately. The landlord was surprisingly understanding and agreed to have someone come out the next morning. Next, I started packing. With Emma's help, I boxed up all of Jake's belongings, from his clothes to his gaming consoles, and stacked them neatly by the door. I didn't touch Lauren's things. She hadn't brought much, but the sight of her cheap perfumes and tacky clothes made my blood boil. Instead, I shoved them into a plastic bag and wrote a note to go along with it. Find somewhere else to stay. The final step was the piece de resistance. I crafted a post for social media, careful not to name names but clear enough that anyone who knew Jake or Lauren would get the message. PSA: if you're going to let your ex move into your girlfriend's apartment while she's out of town, maybe don't forget that the lease is in her name. Some people need to learn that actions have consequences. Emma howled with laughter when I showed her. "You're going to break the internet with this," she said. "That's the idea," I replied, hitting post with a satisfied smirk. The next morning, I went back to the apartment to supervise the lock change. When the locksmith finished, I took a moment to savor the sight of the new deadbolt glinting in the sunlight. It felt symbolic, like I was locking out not just Jake and Lauren but all the toxicity they'd brought into my life. I left Jake a text message, short and to the point: "Your things are packed and waiting by the door. The locks have been changed. You have until tomorrow to pick them up. After that, they're going to Goodwill. Don't contact me again." For Lauren, I didn't bother sending anything. The note on her bag of belongings was message enough. As I walked out of the apartment, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't just getting revenge. I was reclaiming my power. Jake and Lauren thought they could walk all over me, but they'd underestimated the one thing they never saw coming: me. And the best part? This was only the beginning. They had no idea what was coming next. The morning after I finalized my plan, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just cleaning house, I was reclaiming what was mine, piece by piece. If Jake and Lauren thought they could disrespect me and walk away unscathed, they were about to learn a very painful lesson in consequences. The first step was a call to my landlord. I explained the situation as neutrally as I could, skipping the sordid details but making it clear that my apartment needed to be secured immediately. Since I was the only one on the lease, I had full authority to change the locks, and to my relief, my landlord didn't ask too many questions. He agreed to send a locksmith over that afternoon. As soon as I hung up, I got to work. I wasn't going to waste any more time letting their presence linger in my home. Jake's belongings were the first to go: clothes, shoes, his gaming console, and the stack of unopened books he'd always meant to read but never touched. Each item went into a trash bag, and I stacked them neatly by the curb, refusing to let sentimentality slow me down. Lauren's things were even easier to deal with. She hadn't brought much, but the few items she'd managed to scatter around the apartment, her cheap perfumes, a curling iron, and a pile of tacky clothes, were infuriating to look at. I gathered everything into a small box, slapped a piece of tape on top, and scribbled a note to go along with it. "Find somewhere else to stay. You're not welcome here." I placed the box outside the door, taking a moment to admire the final touch. It was petty, yes, but it was also perfectly justified. If Lauren had no problem waltzing into my home uninvited, she could deal with the humiliation of collecting her things from the hallway like the intruder she was. By the time the locksmith arrived, I was already feeling lighter. I watched as he removed the old lock and replaced it with a shiny new deadbolt, every turn of his screwdriver giving me a deeper sense of closure. When he finished, I handed him a generous tip and thanked him profusely. The next step was digital housekeeping. Jake and Lauren had no place in my physical space, and they certainly weren't going to take up residence in my virtual world either. I blocked them on every platform: Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, even Venmo. For good measure, I updated all my privacy settings to ensure they couldn't snoop on my accounts from mutual friends' profiles. It felt cathartic, like slamming a door shut and locking it for good. As a final flourish, I crafted one last social media post. Nothing too specific, but enough to let the people in our circle know that I was done being a doormat. Sometimes, the trash takes itself out. Other times, you have to bag it up and put it on the curb yourself. Either way, it's gone. The post was up for less than 5 minutes before the first wave of reactions rolled in. Friends commented with laughing emojis and words of support, while a few mutuals sent private messages asking if I was okay. I didn't go into details, but the response was overwhelmingly validating. Jake, predictably, didn't take the eviction well. He called me that evening, his tone swinging wildly between outrage and desperation. "What the hell? My name," he yelled. "You can't just throw my stuff out." "I can actually," I said calmly. "The lease is in my name, remember? You're not my problem anymore, Jake." He sputtered, trying to find the right words to manipulate me, but I wasn't giving him the chance. "You have until tomorrow to pick up your things," I added. "After that, they're gone for good." "You're overreacting," he said, his voice dropping into what I assumed was his attempt at sounding reasonable. "It's not like I cheated on you. Are you seriously trying to defend yourself right now?" I snapped. "You let your ex move into our apartment, wear my clothes, and treat my home like a hotel. If that's not cheating, it's close enough." Before he could argue further, I hung up and blocked his number. Lauren's response was even more predictable. She sent a text from an unknown number, dripping with faux innocence. "Wow, I didn't realize you were such a psycho," she wrote. "Jake deserves better than someone so petty and controlling." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Her actions and Jake's had already spoken volumes about who they were. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my freshly reclaimed couch, and let out a deep breath. The apartment felt different now, cleaner, freer, like a weight had been lifted. I knew the fallout from my actions wasn't over yet. Jake and Lauren weren't the type to take their lumps quietly. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. They tried to play me, and now they were learning the hard way that I wasn't someone to mess with. And this was only the beginning. The fallout began the moment Jake came home and realized he'd been locked out. I had imagined this moment for days, but hearing the rage in his voicemail was even more satisfying than I'd expected. "What the hell is this?" he yelled, his voice crackling with anger. "You can't just kick me out. This is our apartment too." I smirked as I listened to his rant. He had the nerve to act like the victim, as if he hadn't completely disrespected me by moving Lauren into my home. I didn't bother calling him back. Instead, I texted him. "The lease is in my name. You don't live here anymore. Your things are by the curb. You have until tomorrow to pick them up, or they'll be donated. Don't contact me again." After hitting send, I blocked his number and set my phone down with a sense of finality. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over my life again. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, curled up on my couch, and let the satisfaction wash over me. The apartment felt so much lighter without Jake's presence weighing it down. Emma stopped by to check on me, bringing a celebratory bottle of champagne. "To reclaiming your peace," she said, raising her glass. "To never letting anyone walk all over me again," I added. We laughed and toasted to my newfound freedom, but the cherry on top came the next morning when I got a text from Marissa. "You're not going to believe this," she wrote, attaching a photo. The image showed Jake and Lauren struggling to load the trash bags of his belongings into her beat-up car. Jake looked disheveled and angry, his face flushed from the effort, while Lauren stood to the side, clearly annoyed. "They look miserable," Marissa added. "You're a legend." I couldn't stop laughing. Seeing them reduced to this, two selfish, entitled people finally facing the consequences of their actions, was the kind of poetic justice I hadn't dared to hope for. Over the next few days, I heard bits and pieces about how things were going for them. Marissa told me that Jake and Lauren had been arguing in the parking lot for nearly an hour before finally driving off. A mutual friend texted me to say that Jake was crashing on someone's couch, while Lauren had gone radio silent. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for either of them. They had made their choices, and now they were dealing with the fallout. Meanwhile, I threw myself into making the apartment truly mine again. I redecorated, tossing out anything that reminded me of Jake or our time together. I painted the walls a fresh color, rearranged the furniture, and splurged on a few new pieces to make the space feel like home. Every time I walked through the door, I felt a sense of pride and relief. This was my space now, free of lies, betrayal, and toxic energy. Of course, Jake tried to reach out one last time. He sent an email, full of excuses and half-hearted apologies. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he wrote. "I still care about you, and I wish we could talk things through." I deleted it without replying. His words meant nothing to me anymore. He had shown me exactly who he was, and I wasn't about to give him another chance to hurt me. As for Lauren, she stayed true to form, posting cryptic, passive-aggressive quotes on social media about toxic people and cutting out negativity. It would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. But I didn't let their drama distract me. I was too busy moving forward, reclaiming my happiness one step at a time. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, and I had no intention of looking back. And if Jake and Lauren thought they could rebuild their little fantasy life without me, well, good luck to them. Karma wasn't finished with them yet. Today, I look back on everything that happened and feel nothing but gratitude. Not for Jake or Lauren. Trust me, they're still the cautionary tale I share with friends over wine nights, but for the lessons their betrayal taught me. Losing them felt devastating at the time, but in the end, it was the best thing that could have happened. Reclaiming my apartment was the first step. Once they were out of the picture, the space became a blank canvas for a new chapter in my life. I filled it with things that made me happy: plants, artwork, and furniture I'd always wanted but never bought because Jake didn't like it. I even turned what used to be Jake's gaming corner into a cozy reading nook. Every change I made felt like taking a piece of myself back. The transformation wasn't just physical, though. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely at peace. No more second-guessing myself. No more walking on eggshells. No more draining relationships weighing me down. It was liberating. Jake and Lauren, on the other hand, didn't fare quite as well. Word spread quickly among our mutual friends about what happened, and let's just say they didn't come out looking like the heroes of the story. A few weeks after the fallout, a mutual friend told me that Jake and Lauren were already fighting. "Apparently, living together isn't as fun when it's not behind someone else's back," she said with a smirk. The news didn't surprise me. Their relationship was built on lies, disrespect, and selfishness, hardly the foundation for a happily ever after. Last I heard, they'd broken up after a particularly nasty argument, with Lauren accusing Jake of being a man-child and Jake calling hers high maintenance. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a tiny bit of satisfaction hearing that their fairy tale had crumbled. But more than anything, it reaffirmed what I already knew. I'd dodged a bullet. Looking back, I realized their betrayal was a turning point for me, not just in my relationship but in how I approached life. Before all this, I had a bad habit of putting other people's needs ahead of my own, of tolerating bad behavior because I didn't want to rock the boat. Jake and Lauren forced me to confront that. Their actions hurt me deeply, but they also showed me the importance of standing up for myself, setting boundaries, and knowing when to walk away. Now, I surround myself with people who respect me, who lift me up instead of dragging me down. I've learned to trust my instincts, to value my own happiness, and to never settle for less than I deserve. My story didn't end with Jake and Lauren. It started there. And today, I'm living proof that even the worst betrayals can lead to something beautiful. As for them, they've faded into the background, their drama nothing more than a distant memory. Their actions might have broken me for a moment, but they also built me back up into someone stronger than I ever thought I could be. And that's the ultimate payback.